We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Dalet Amud Aleph in Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 14a. On the previous summit, the Gemara asked, how do we know that by Yibum the kinyan is made through Bia? And the Gemara now quotes a pasuk as the source. The pasuk says, Yavama Yavo Aleho Ulakachalo Leisha. It says the Yavam will have Bia with her and take her for a wife. And Rashi says, Yavo Aleho Ulakachalo Kalomar Biyasa Hein Likucha, meaning to say the pasuk is saying, the Bia, that is the taking of her, that is the act of kinyan. And the Gemara continues, Ve'emo l'kula milsa ke'isha, but maybe what the pasuk is saying is that it should be compared entirely to a wife, and not only is bia a kinyan, but also kesef should be a kinyan, also shtar should be a kinyan. Rashi explains, V'dilma ke'isha ma'isha kesef u'shtar ki bia. What maybe the pasuk means is, just like by an isha, kesef and shtar are the same as bia, af yavama kesef u'shtar ki bia, so too by yavama, kesef and shtar should be a kinyan just like bia. D'achsiv li'isha, because it says in the pasuk li'isha, it's comparing to a regular situation of marriage. And the Gemara says, Lo salka daitach, don't think that is the case. The Tanya is learned in a brisa, Yachol yu kesef u'shtar gomrim ba kederech shabia gomeres ba. I might think that kesef and shtar create the kinyan just like bia creates the kinyan. Talmud lomar v'yibma, the pasuk also says v'yibma, and we learn from that pasuk, bia gomeres ba ve'ein kesef u'shtar gomrim ba, that bia, that creates the kinyan, but kesef and shtar, they do not create the kinyan. And Rashi says, V'yibma bia mashma shana le'akasav li'akev. The word v'yibma, that also is mashma, an act of bia, an act of relations. And it's as if the pasuk is repeating it to say, it's only bia that's gomeres ba, and kesef and shtar, they are not gomeres ba. And the Gemara continues, V'ema mai v'yibma debal karcha miyavim. But maybe v'yibma really means that it can be even against her will. You can have yibum. And the Gemara says, Im kain, if so, lema kraf v'yabeim. And the pasuk could have just said v'yabeim. Mai v'yibma. Why does it say v'yibma? Shamat min atarti. So you learn out from there both of these halachas. You learn that it could be bal karcha. You learn that it could be against her will. And you also learn again, bia gomeres ba, v'yen kesef u'shtar gomrim ba. And the Gemara continues, B'chalitza, the Mishnah said that when it comes to Yibum, in order to get out of Yibum, so the act of Chalitza is done. And the Gemara says, Minolan, from where do we know this? And Rashi explains, Minolan de Chalutza muteres lehinase. How do we know that a Chalutza, meaning if the brother-in-law, if he did Chalitza with her, how do we know she's now mutter to marry anyone? Dilma mitzvahs Chalitza hu derama rachmon Allah. Maybe there's just a mitzvahs Chalitza that you have to do. Uliolam, but really, lo mishtarya, maybe she really is not permitted to marry others. So that's what the Gemara means when it says Menolan. From where do we know this? And the Gemara says Dechsib, because it's written in the pasuk V'nikra Shemo b'Yisrael Beis Chalutz Hanal. It says that his name will be called in Yisrael Beis Chalutz Hanal, the house of the Chalutz Hanal. Kevon shecholatz banal. Once he's cholatz banal, once he takes off the shoe, hutra lechol Yisrael. So now she is mutter to all of Yisrael. That's what it means. Be Yisrael. That's the idea. Be Yisrael beis chalutz, as Rashi says. Be Yisrael beis chalutz hachi mashma. Be Yisrael ru'uya lahavi lebayis misha cholza. That in Klal Yisrael you can bring her to a house, meaning to say again, you can bring her to marry others once chalitza is done. That is the source. Hutra l'chol Yisrael, at the time, once you have chalitza, she's hutra l'chol Yisrael. And the Gemara continues, Hay Yisrael l'hachi udasa, but is the word Yisrael really coming to teach us that? Haymi boy lei l'chidetani Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. Isn't it coming to teach us, isn't it needed for what is taught by Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda? Be Yisrael, what does it mean, be Yisrael? It means bebezdin shal Yisrael, it means it has to be done in a Jewish court. V'lo bebezdin shal ovdei kochavim, it cannot be done in the court of the non-Jews. And the Gemara says to that, Shrei be Yisrael ksivi, it says the word be Yisrael twice. Rashi says, Trey be Yisrael, lahakim la'achiv shem be Yisrael. It also uses the word be Yisrael in that pasuk where it says lahakim la'achiv shem be Yisrael. And so therefore we have two psukim. One to teach us it has to be a Jewish court and not a non-Jewish court. And the other pasuk again is to teach us that it's the chalitza that permits her to marry. But the Gemara says, Ve'akati, but still, mi boile l'chidetanya, don't we need that pasuk for the following brisa? Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Pamachas ayinu yoshvim lifnei Rabbi Tarfon. One time we were sitting in front of Rabbi Tarfon, uvasa yivama lachlot, and a yivama came for chalitza. V'amar lanu, and he said to us, Anu lekulchem, all of you should answer, v'imru, and you should say, chalutz hanal, you should say, chalutz hanal, and so doesn't that come from the pasuk of v'nikra shmo b'Yisrael, that he should be called in Yisrael, chalutz hanal? And the Gemara says to that, Tahu mi v'nikra shemo nafka, that's learned out from the pasuk, from the words v'nikra shemo, and so therefore you still have the word b'Yisrael, and you can learn out from b'Yisrael, as we said, that she's now mutter to marry. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Uvamisas hayavam, when the yavam dies, so then she's also permitted. And the Gemara says, Menolim, from where do you know this? And the Gemara says, Kal v'chomer, we know it from a Kal v'chomer. Uma eishes ishi bechenek, if when it comes to a married woman, who the punishment is chenek if she's with another man, misa sabal matirasa, when the husband dies, she is now mutter to marry others. Yevama shehi belav, when it comes to Yevama, where we're only talking about a negative commandment, we're only talking about a lav. Rashi says shehi belav lashuk, meaning for her to marry others, it's only a lav. Losia eishes hames hachutza liishtar. It says that the eishes hames shouldn't marry someone else, she shouldn't marry a stranger, she needs to marry the Yavam, but that's only a lav, that's a negative commandment. So Yevama shehi belav, Yevama where it's only a lav, lo kol shekain, isn't it true? Isn't it certainly true that with the misas hayavam, when the Yavam dies, that she's now going to be mutter? But the Gemara says, not necessarily. Mala eshes ishken yotze beget. What's unique about a married woman is she can leave with a get. Tomar bezu she'ena yotze beget. When it comes to the Yavama, she's not able to leave with a get. So maybe the Misas Hayavam does not permit her. And the Gemara says, Hanami yotze bechalitza. But this case also, even though she doesn't leave with a get, she leaves with a chalitza, that's the equivalent. And so therefore, again, we say, just like an eshes ish, when the husband dies, she's mutter, so too by the Yavama, when the Yavam dies, she's mutter. Elamala eshes ish shekain osra matir. But you could argue, what's unique about Eshes Ish is the person who caused her to be Aser, meaning the person who did the Kiddushin, the husband, so he's the one that makes her Aser, and he's the one that makes her Mutter when he dies. But over here, that's not true. Over here, what made her Aser was her original marriage to her husband, and now it's the death of the Yavam that's able to make her Mutter. And the Gemara says, Amar Ravashi says, Hanami Osra Matira, here also the one who made her Aser is the one that's making her Mutter. Yavam Osra, Yavam Shari. It's really the Yavam who made her Aser. If there's no Yavam, there's no problem. She wouldn't be Aser. So it's the Yavam that's making her Aser, and therefore it's Yavam Sharila, therefore it's the Yavam who's making her Mutter. But the Gemara continues, why don't we say that a married woman should be able to leave her marriage through chalitza, and we can make the following kal v'chomer. If by a yevama where a get doesn't work but chalitza is effective, when it comes to an eshes ish where a get is effective, isn't it true that chalitza should be effective? And to that the Gemara says, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Sefer Krisus. It says the Sefer is the one that creates the Krisus. Sefer Karsa ve'en davar acher Karsa. It is the Sefer that creates the separation, and nothing else creates the separation. Therefore we see that a get is what permits her, but not a chalitza. And the Gemara continues, we should have the other direction. A Yevama should be able to leave, she should be permitted with a get from the following kal v'chomer. If when it comes to an eshes ish, she doesn't leave her marriage with chalitza, but she's able to leave her marriage with a get. So when it comes to the Yevama who does leave with chalitza, ein din sheyotze beget, shouldn't it be true that she leaves with a get? And to that, the Gemara says, Amar Kra kacha v'kacha, the pasuk says kacha v'kacha, ikuva, so that means it's an ikuva, meaning to say, it's saying only chalitza, and get is not effective. But the Gemara continues, V'chol heicha di'iko ikuva lo darshin and kal v'chomer, is it really true that any time you have a pasuk that says something is ma'akev, you're not allowed to make a kal v'chomer? By Yom HaKippurim, but what about by Yom HaKippurim, by the two seirim, where one goes l'Hashem and one goes l'Azazel, t'chsiv, because it's written in the pasuk gorel, it says you have to do a lottery, v'chuka, and then it says the word v'chuka, which means that it's ma'akev. V'tanya, and yet we learned in a brayso of Yaso chatos, it says that they draw the gorel, and the gorel decides which one is the carbon chatos and which one is going to be la'azazel. Ha-gorel osa chatos ve'en Hashem osa chatos. It's the gorel that creates the chatos, and it's not the calling it a carbon chatos. It's not just declaring that this one is a chatos that creates the carbon chatos. Sheyachol, because I might have said, v'alo dinu, that we have the following kal v'chomer. Uma b'makom shelo kiddush ha-gorel, just like in situations of karbonos where you don't have a lottery that creates the kedusha, but kiddush Hashem, but calling it that particular carbon, that's what sanctifies it. So makom shekiddush ha-gorel, so in a situation like the two seirim where the gorel creates the kedusha, eino din sheyikadosh Hashem, shouldn't we make a kal v'chomer that also if he pronounces it chatos, that also should be effective? Talmud lomar, so the pasuk says v'yasohu chatos, it says v'yasohu chatos, ha-gorel osa chatos ve'en Hashem osa chatos, the gorel creates the chatos and the shem does not create the chatos. And so the Gemara says v'taima demiyate kra, the only reason why we're not able to make the kal v'chomer is because there's a specific exclusion in the pasuk. Halav hachi darshin and kal v'chomer, if not for this we would darshan the kal v'chomer. Afagav dechsiv bechuka, even though it says the word chuka, and again the word chuka, even though that word is used to say that it's ma'akev, but still apparently we would darshan a kal kal v'chomer. So you see also when it comes to the situation, when we're talking about get isha, we're talking about chalitza, just because you have an ikuva, just because chalitza is ma'akev, but still you could make a kal v'chomer and say that get should also be effective. And the Gemara says there's another pasuk, Amar Kra, the pasuk says la v'lo liyavama. The pasuk says la, and so therefore we understand la meaning to say by a regular eshes ish. That's where we say that a get is going to be effective, but by a yavama, a get is not going to be effective. That's referring to the pasuk that says v'chasav la sefer krisis, and so we learn from there that get isha is not effective by yavama. But the Gemara still says v'yemo lo lishma, but maybe the word la is really saying that it has to be written lishma. And the Gemara says to that, Shrei lo ksivi. It says lo twice, but the Gemara still says, V'yakati mi boy lechad lo lishma, v'idach la v'lo lo ulechaverta. But still we need the second pasuk of la. One of them means that it has to be lishma, and the other pasuk of la means it has to be to her, and it can't be to her and her friend. You can't use the get for two women. And the Gemara instead says, Elam Arkra, rather it's because the pasuk says, Na'al, it says you're going to use the Na'al by Chalitza, Na'al in media achrina lo. You're using the Na'al, you're using the shoe, and nothing else. You cannot use a get isha. But the Gemara still says, V'hai Na'al lahachi uda'asa, but is the word Na'al really for that? Haimi boile l'cheretanya, isn't it needed for the following brisa? Ne'alo, the pasuk says, Ne'alo, his shoe. Ein li ela ne'alo, I only know that it's his shoe. Na'al shel kol adam inale, from how do I know? From where do I know that it can be the shoe of anyone? Talmud lomar Na'al riba, the pasuk says Na'al, it repeats it, and it means to be an inclusion. But the Gemara says, Im kain ma'atamad lomar ne'alo. But if so, why does it say ne'alo? It means to say ne'alo haroilo. It means to say it has to be a shoe that's fit for him. Prat legadol she'en yachol halech bo, that comes to exclude a large shoe, which he's not able to walk in. Prat lekatan she'en chofes rov raglo, to exclude a small shoe, which doesn't cover the majority of his feet. Prat, and also to exclude. And we'll take a look at a few Rashis over here. The pasuk says, Dechsiv gorol al ha-seirim, by the seirim, it says again, you draw lots. Uchsiv chuka, and it also says the word chuka, beparsha v'chol chuka ikuvahu, the word chuka, that also says that this is ma'akev, you have to do it. Ha-gorol osachatos, and we understand that it is the gorol that creates the chatos. Seir shagorol hashem ola olav osachatos, meaning if you have the soyer, where the lot which says it's lashem, that one goes on that soyer, that creates it, that it's a chatos. V'yein hashem im kora olav shem chatos, meaning, but if you just call it a chatos, eino nikva bekach, that's not enough to make it chatos. V'yapil aleim gorolos, you have to have gorolos, v'mipol ha-gorol ha-chaver, if the gorol would be on the other one. Yehezel la-azazel, this one would actually go la-azazel. Sheyachol, because I might have thought, kolomar la-hachi itzrich ha-ikra, the reason why I need the pasuk is, shayisi yachol omar, because I could have said, uma'abim makam shelo kiddush ha-gorol, just like in places by karbanos where you don't have a gorol, kagon gabekinin dechsib bohem echad lechatos v'echad liola, for example, by the bird karbanos, where one is a chatos and one is an ola, v'im hitel aleim gorol, if you use a gorol in that case to determine which is which, einam nikvoim bekach, that doesn't say which one is which, that doesn't create that this one is a chatos and this one is an ola. V'yachol shnosim, if he wants to change them, he could. Dekaimalan b'seder yuma and akin and misparshos ela o belakichas bailim o basias kohen, because we say in seder yuma that the kinan you can only decide which one is an ola and which one is a chatos either through the purchase of the owners or through the creation of the kohen, that the kohen determines which is which. Kiddush Hashem imamar v'shas lakicha zu lechatos v'zu la'ola hukvu. Again, when it comes over there in the case of the birds, if he says when he takes it, this is for a chatos and this is for an ola, that establishes that this is a chatos and this is an ola. V'mshina pasal, if he would then change it to be pasal. Kan shekiddush hagorol, so you might say over here where the gorol is effective, t'chsiv v'nasan aron v'gomer ein din. So then certainly if you just pronounce, you declare, that should be effective. Talmud lomar shana olav liakev. So the pasuk says again, it repeats to say that it's ma'akev. Have a darshin on kal v'chomer, and it sounds like if we didn't have the exclusion, so then we would have a kal v'chomer. Lahavi mashalo nichtav a parsha, we would include something that wasn't written in the parsha. V'avagav dechsiv ikuv, even though it says that the parsha is ma'akev, but apparently a kal v'chomer could include something that wasn't written in the Torah. And so the Gemara says, you're right, it is possible to darshan a kal v'chomer even in a situation where you have a pasuk that says it's ma'akev, and the Gemara instead says we learn from law dechsiv v'chasav law, so it means that the get works for an eshes ish, and it doesn't work for the yavama. The Gemara then said shrei laksiv, it actually says law twice, usneo ha'isha achron v'gomer. In the pasuk of usneo ha'isha achron, it also goes on to say v'chasav law. And then the Gemara says we need that for v'lo law ulechaverta. You can't use one get for two women. Sheshmos and shavin. Let's say, for example, they have the same name. She'in shtei nashim is garishos beget echad. You can't have two women being divorced with one get. Im kasa ploni megarish plonis su plonis nashav. Let's say it said so and so is divorced divorcing so-and-so who are his wives, and they had the same name. And then the Gemara said, Amar Kra Nal, the pasuk says Nal, Kra Yisera, that's an extra pasuk. Beis Chalutz Hanal, it says Beis Chalutz Hanal, Dematzi L'Michtav, Beis HaChalutz. It could have just said Beis HaChalutz. And so therefore, from that extra pasuk, we learn that it's Nal in, you use the Nal and nothing else. And then the Gemara said, Prat L'Nal Gadol She'en Yochel Halach Bo. The Gemara said that the word Nal is coming to say, that's when it says Ne'olo, it's to exclude a large shoe which he's not able to walk in, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yodalid Amud Beis.